What happens when one of Hollywood's most beloved actors walks into a morning show expecting a routine interview, only to be ambushed on live TV? That's exactly what played out on Good Morning America, when Robert Downey Jr. sat across from George Stephanopoulos, completely unaware he was walking into a verbal minefield. Downey arrived early that morning, his trademark charm in full swing as he greeted the crew and prepped to promote his new film. He expected the usual round of promotional questions: his acting career, life after Iron Man, maybe a few light-hearted stories. But George had other plans. Unbeknownst to Downey, Stephanopoulos had spent the night digging through old headlines, controversies, and past interviews, armed with a stack of notes that looked more like a legal dossier than show prep. As the cameras started rolling and the theme music faded, George smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Good morning. I'm here with Robert Downey Jr.," he began smoothly. "Thanks for joining us, especially considering some recent resurfaced stories about your past." Downey blinked, momentarily thrown. "Morning, George. Not sure what you're referring to, but happy to talk about the new film." "Oh, I think you know exactly what I mean," George said, leaning forward like a prosecutor about to pounce. "Let's talk about your history with addiction, your arrests, the chaos you caused on film sets. How can people trust you not to relapse again and let them down?" The air in the studio seemed to freeze. Downey's expression shifted. The friendly smile vanished, replaced by calm steel. "I came here to talk about my work, not to relive a chapter of my life I've openly addressed for more than a decade." George wasn't letting go. In fact, he seemed energized by the tension. "But don't you think it's convenient how your redemption arc skips over the damage you caused? The productions you nearly derailed, the people affected by your actions." Downey sat forward now, jaw tight. "There seems to be a serious misunderstanding about what this interview was supposed to be. I've taken responsibility. I've made amends." "What exactly are you trying to achieve here, George?" "I'm doing journalism," George snapped. "Asking real questions, not lobbing softballs. Maybe you're just not used to dealing with real journalists anymore." That line lit the fuse. Downey's voice dropped to a chilling calm. "Real journalism. Is that what this is? Because from where I'm sitting, this looks like a cheap ratings stunt from someone whose glory days ended in the 90s. The shot landed. George's face flushed with anger, and for a moment his polished demeanor cracked. "How dare you question my credibility?" he fired back. "I've been in this business longer than you've been sober." And there it was. Downey let out a breath, a bitter smile forming. The real George Stephanopoulos finally shows up. "Tell me, is this how you treat all your guests? Or am I just lucky today?" The studio was silent. Camera operators froze. Producers behind the scenes exchanged frantic glances. George tried to recover. "I treat my guests with the respect their honesty earns. And frankly, Robert, your history speaks for itself. My history." Downey's voice grew colder. "Let's talk about your history. Using this platform to feed your ego, humiliating guests for a cheap soundbite. That's what this is really about, isn't it?" Now visibly rattled, George tried to hold the line. "You don't know what you're talking about. I've built a career on integrity." Downey laughed, no warmth in it. "You call this integrity? Setting up a guest, blindsiding them with 20-year-old gossip. If this is your definition of journalism, I feel sorry for anyone who works with you." The tension peaked. The interview had become a battlefield, and neither man was backing down. Then came the final blow. George leaned back in his chair, smug. "You know what, Robert? Maybe the problem isn't the questions. Maybe the problem is you. Maybe you're still that unstable person from years ago, just better at hiding it." Downey's body stilled. His knuckles whitened against the arms of his chair. When he spoke, it was almost a whisper. "What did you just say to me?" George smirked. "You heard me. All this talk about growth. But the moment someone pushes you, the old Robert shows up." Downey's response was ice. You want hard questions. I've faced real journalists. People who challenged me with professionalism and decency. This is a hit job. A George scoffed, waving a hand. Oh, please. But it was too late. What had started as a morning interview had become a live televised showdown. And only one of them was walking away with their reputation intact. Don't try to flip this on me, George snapped. I'm not the one with a history of public meltdowns and arrests. I'm not the one who had to be carried off set because I couldn't handle my own life. That was the moment Robert Downey Jr.'s famous restraint finally cracked. He stood fast and hard, his chair slamming back into the set with a thud that made even the crew flinch. You know what, George, he said, voice low but charged. I'm done. I'm done pretending this is a real interview. I'm done letting you try to crucify me for your own amusement. George's eyes glinted, something between adrenaline and smug satisfaction. Walking out? That's your big move. Just like you ran from rehab, from courtrooms, from the wreckage you left behind. Robert turned on him, eyes blazing. I didn't run. I fought. I faced every damn demon you're snidely referencing. I clawed my way back from the edge, brick by brick, with no guarantee the world would ever take me seriously again. And you sit there, hiding behind your desk and your teleprompter, and call that cowardice. I fight for the truth, George replied, but the words were hollow now, drifting without weight. Robert laughed, bitter and cutting. You wouldn't know the truth if it kicked in your dressing room door. You've built an entire persona out of tearing people down. This performance, it's not journalism. It's character assassination with studio lighting. The crew was scrambling. The director wildly gestured at the cameras, unsure whether to cut or keep rolling. This was a train wreck, but it was also irresistible television. George tried to salvage control. If you'd just sit down and answer the questions like an adult. A tantrum. Robert interrupted, incredulous. You think this is a tantrum? No. This is a reaction to being dragged through the mud for entertainment. You want to talk about my past? Fine. Let's talk about yours. He stepped forward, suddenly towering. Let's talk about how this show became your personal coliseum, where you play judge, jury, and executioner. You didn't come here to ask questions. You came here to humiliate me? George stiffened. You're out of line. But his voice cracked just enough to betray him. No, George. You're out of line. Robert's voice dropped, steady and lethal. You ambushed me with gossip rags from 2 decades ago. You questioned my sobriety. You attacked my character live, in front of millions. And now you want to act shocked when I push back. The hypocrisy is so thick, I'm choking on it. George looked rattled. Beads of sweat formed on his temple. His next line came out weak, almost pleading. I was just asking about your fitness as a role model. Robert raised an eyebrow. Role model. That's your justification for this. You trying to drag someone through the dirt on national TV is concern now. He leaned in. Let me tell you what kind of role model you are, George. The kind who thinks power means permission. The kind who weaponizes questions. Who hides cruelty behind a press badge. George paled. I have never abused my position, he stammered. Everything I do is to inform the public. Inform them of what? Robert shot back. That a man's worst years are fair game if it makes your segment trend. That you can use someone's pain to settle old scores and call it journalism. He paused, letting the silence thicken. This isn't about my past. This is about your ego. This is about you needing to feel relevant in a world that barely remembers what you used to be. The words landed like punches. George opened his mouth, but no defense came. For the first time in the entire interview, he looked visibly shaken. Robert moved in for the final blow, voice calm, almost sorrowful. You know the sad part. You used to be good. I watched you, years ago, when you actually cared about getting things right. When facts mattered more to you than going viral, he tilted his head. What happened to that guy, George? When did you trade integrity for spectacle? I haven't changed, George whispered, but even he didn't believe it. Robert shook his head. Then I guess the world outgrew you. The room was silent. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. I came here to talk about work. About art. About redemption, Robert said, turning away from the desk. But you decided to play executioner instead of interviewer. So here we are. He didn't wait for permission. He walked off set. And no one, not even George, tried to stop him. Let me tell you something, Robert said, his voice steady but razor sharp. I don't need your approval. I don't need your validation. And I sure as hell don't need to sit here and be insulted by a man clearly wrestling with his own demons. George leaned forward, trying to regain control. Robert, I think you're overreacting. These are standard questions. Any public figure should be prepared to answer them. Standard questions. Robert's eyebrows shot up in disbelief. George, I've been interviewed by everyone, from Barbara Walters to Howard Stern. I've talked about my past more times than I can count, but never, not once, have I seen anyone approach it with the kind of venom and smug satisfaction you've shown here today. He paused, letting the silence bite. This wasn't journalism. This was an execution. And you were so eager to pull the trigger, you forgot to check if the gun was even loaded. The metaphor landed like a slap. George's mouth opened, then closed. He blinked rapidly, struggling for words. But Robert was just getting started. The years of media polish and the instinct of a performer had kicked in. Now, he was in full command. You want to know what's really disturbing about all this? He said, voice low but cutting. It's not just the ambush. It's the planning. You didn't just stumble into this. You mapped it out. You sat in your office, or a meeting room, with your little notes and your fake concern, and you decided today was the day you were going to try to dismantle Robert Downey Jr. on national television. He leaned forward slightly. What kind of person makes that choice? George finally croaked out a response. I was just doing my job. Robert let out a cold, humorless laugh. Your job. Your job is to inform the public, not to use your platform to work out your own insecurities on your guests. But honestly, I almost feel sorry for you. He turned toward the camera crew without losing a beat. Because anyone watching this can see it plain as day. A man desperate to feel relevant, trying to tear down someone who actually clawed their way back from the edge. George had gone pale. You can't talk to me like that. This is my show. Your show. Robert repeated, his voice tightening with disgust. Well, congratulations. This is your show. And this is what you've turned it into. A modern coliseum where you get to toss people to the lions for cheap applause. That's enough? George said, but his voice cracked mid-sentence. Oh no, George. Not by a long shot, Robert said, stepping closer to the desk, his presence overwhelming. Because I think your audience deserves to know who's really behind that desk. A bully, not a journalist. A man who hides behind a title and a teleprompter so he can humiliate people who trusted him enough to show up. The cameras kept rolling. The silence on set was total, save for the hum of the equipment and the quiet devastation settling over George's face. This isn't just an interview gone wrong, Robert continued, his voice dropping to something even more dangerous, something sad. This is the collapse of whatever integrity you thought you had. And the saddest part, I used to respect you? George looked up, startled. I did. I thought you were one of the good ones, Robert said. Someone who understood that with a platform comes responsibility. But instead, you've used yours to exploit, to bait, to betray. He took a final breath. How many others have you done this to? How many guests walked out of here feeling violated while you called it journalism? I treat all my guests fairly. George mumbled. Even he didn't sound like he believed it. Fairly, Robert repeated, shaking his head. If this is your idea of fairness, then you need to take a long, hard look at yourself. Because what you've done here today isn't just unfair, it's indecent. George looked broken. But Robert wasn't finished. You took someone who came here in good faith and turned them into your punching bag. For what? Ratings. A cheap thrill. The approval of an audience that enjoys watching other people bleed on cue. George made one last effort. The public has a right to know. Your past affects your credibility. Robert's tone turned deadly quiet. My past, he said, rising to full height. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about behavior, George. Robert said, voice calm but razor sharp. Let's talk about your behavior today. About ambushing guests. About turning personal trauma into cheap spectacle. About using your platform to settle whatever grudge you've been nursing under the guise of journalism. He leaned forward, eyes locked on George. You want to talk credibility, public trust. Maybe start with a mirror. The studio had gone dead silent. Even the crew had frozen. No whispers, no movement. Just Robert's voice, echoing off the walls like a slow, rolling avalanche. Here's what's going to happen, he continued, voice dropping to a whisper laced with menace. I'm going to walk out of here. And you're going to explain to your producers, your network, and your audience how you managed to commit professional suicide on live television. George opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Every time someone brings this up, Robert said, you'll remember you had Robert Downey Jr. in your studio. And instead of having a real conversation, you chose to expose exactly who you are. George stammered, grasping at control. You can't just walk out. We're live. You have obligations. Robert laughed, dark and cutting. Obligations? He repeated, shaking his head. My only obligation was to be honest and professional, which I've done, despite your efforts to drag me into the mud. But I'm under no obligation to sit here and be verbally mugged by a man with more unresolved issues than a magazine rack. Deliberately, Robert began unhooking his mic. Every movement slow, measured. Calculated for impact. You want to know what real strength is, George? It's walking away from toxicity. It's refusing to feed the ego of someone so desperate for relevance they're willing to burn down their own career for a viral moment. Robert, please. For the first time, George's voice cracked. Genuine panic. We can start over. We'll talk about your new project. Robert paused mid-removal and looked at him with a trace of pity. George, you can't unring a bell. You can't erase the last 20 minutes of your life. You made your choice. Now you get to live with it. The mic came free with a sharp pop of static. Robert held it in his hand for a moment, almost like it was something dirty. Then, with surgical precision, he placed it on George's desk. You know what's sad about all this? Robert said, adjusting his jacket with that effortless movie star grace. I came here looking forward to this. Thought we might talk about art, redemption, second chances. But instead I watched a bitter man weaponize his show to humiliate a guest. And in doing so, remind the world what happens when empathy dies on live TV. George made one final desperate plea. Robert, we can edit this. We can fix it. Robert blinked. Then, almost amused, George, this is live television. Millions of people just watched you implode in real time. There's no editing that. There's no fixing who you've shown yourself to be. He stepped toward the edge of the set, then turned back one last time. I hope whatever you got out of this, whatever fleeting power trip it gave you, was worth it. Because from now on, every guest who sits in that chair will remember what happened today. They'll remember that George Stephanopoulos is the man who tried to destroy a guest and ended up destroying himself instead. And with that, Robert Downey Jr. walked off the Good Morning America set, leaving George alone behind his desk, frozen, staring blankly into the camera. The silence stretched, tense, endless, until someone finally had the instinct to cut to commercial. But it was too late. The damage was done. The confrontation had played out in real time to millions, and there was no taking any of it back. So, what really happened here? Was George's attack on Robert part of a planned takedown, or just the biggest implosion of his career? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more behind the scenes moments that show you what really happens when the cameras start rolling.